All right, hello friends and followers. So here's the story, the end of the story, I hope, on the on the bearing mechanism of the Central Electronics 100V transmitter. So as you can see, that's mounted back on here, and I finally got it back together. So in the last video, you'll see where I ground down the big spring that was in here. I ground off a couple of the loops so the spring had less tension. You have to have that spring in here or the bearings will be not steady, and this shaft would move up and down, and then your tuning would move up and down, and you wouldn't have accurate tuning. So you need a good tense spring in there. I'm not sure it needed as much tension as it had. And that's also bad for the bearings. So anyway, this was really difficult to get back together, and I'll tell you how I did it. I didn't film it, but it was hard. So I did, of course, decrease the tension of the spring a lot, as I told you. And I put the bottom circlip back in this thing. The circlip is back in the bottom. And then I slipped the assembly back into here. Oh, and I also had to take off that spacer piece of aluminum that was curved around. And I packed this thing full of synthetic grease. I mean, I really packed a lot of synthetic grease in here. And my hope is that some of the synthetic grease will creep into these bearings. Okay, because I do not want to ever take this thing apart again. It was horrible. Okay, so the hard part then is that when you put this back together, it's a nightmare. So I didn't have a vise. I didn't pull off this little gear, which I guess supposedly comes off. I figured I would break off a tooth with a wheel puller, or I would mess the gear up. I just didn't want to do that. So I had to put it back together with the gear. So the trick is loosening up the spring so you can work with this thing. And the only way I could figure to do that was take the assembly out and get the grinder. And I took the hand grinder, which is a large grinding wheel, like a 8-inch grinder wheel, and I just ground that spring down until the loops were extinguished on one side. However, you can't take the spring out because you need that spring in there for some tension. So now I probably took the spring tension down 80–90%. I took the tension down so far that I could use a screwdriver and push this bearing in. With 2 screwdrivers, I could push the bearing down about that much and get clearance. So then what good did that do me? So I was able to lift this gear up and get the circlip in there, and then had the circlip around where it would go pretty much, and then I would push on the circlip while holding it with the circlip contraction pliers, which was really hard to do. Lucked out, and eventually the circlip was just on here with the lip, and that's all the further it would go in. But because I loosened up the spring tension a lot, I was able to get screwdrivers and push that circlip down until it clicked into here. And that's how that was solved. So that bearing will push down on its own if the spring is made to have less tension, because then you can work with it. The spring, as it comes from Central Electronics, the way this thing is shipped, it has so much tension, you can't even budge this thing. You can budge it maybe with a screwdriver and lift up this assembly, but it took about 10x the force that I used. I mean, this thing makes a snap when that thing was loaded the way Central Electronics had it. So I pretty much hacked the spring and ruined it, I'm sure, but I don't care. The spring still works the way it is. It still provides tension. This is not loose. It just provides a lot less tension. So that's how that was solved. And this thing's back in and installed. So I did have some other problems with this thing, and I'll go through those. There's a little brass fitting on the back of this thing that if you crank this out, there's a washer that I wasn't sure that washer went there, but I could see it had a square indentation from this thing. So I put the washer there thinking it goes there. There's a little brass thing with little brass thing here that goes in, and it's specially made. It's held by this little clip here, and I think I sort of broke that clip. It seems like it holds it, but you know, it hasn't come out yet. Anyway, I also lubricated this with synthetic grease in here, and I didn't work with the alignment. It seems like this thing is now working really, really well, so I'm just not going to tinker with it anymore. I'm happy with the performance of it. So, and even the little knob here is working, as you can see. So now the whole thing goes into getting the dials to work again. So anyway, that's my exposition with this little unit here. Personally, I would not ever want to advise anyone to take this bearing assembly apart. If this thing is frozen, oh my God, if it's frozen, it's like, you can see where I've chewed up this gear somewhat, horsing with it. I would shoot WD-40 into here like crazy to try and loosen this thing up. I wouldn't take it apart. WD-40 may not last that long, but don't take this thing apart. Just don't bother. You'll never get it back together. I guess if you do it the way the book says, the way maybe Nicholas says, or Nick says to do it, Dominic, you may have success. He's saying use a wheel puller on this, and then change the spring out for a spring that he recommends. And that spring is easy to find on Amazon, but I don't know. I was about almost to give up on the radio with this VFO. I just didn't think I was going to get it back together. Anyway, this thing is pretty solid. It doesn't have any end play. This is working real smooth with the permeability tuned oscillators going in and out. The frequency adjusters are working. I greased those up, so I don't see any issues with this thing at all. I don't think there's any backlash in it. Let's see if there's any. Doesn't seem to be. There might be a little bit, but I mean, it's gonna be no worse than a Drake. So I'm thinking this thing's going. So that's it. Now I gotta get these gears kind of figured out. The gears have lubrication points here, and these gears were kind of loose when I got this radio, this transmitter. These gears weren't working either. This is kind of stiff in here. I gotta get that lubricated. I'll probably pull this one out and lubricate it. This gear was also loose, but I do know that when this is all put back together, the dial does move, so it all still works. So the VFO is salvageable. I just got to get it back together. I did put some 6-volt LED lights in here, so this thing ought to have a lot of brightness. I want to get this cleaned up with soap and water, nothing else. And I guess pop it back in the radio. Then it's time to work on the transmitters, electrics, some of the capacitors and things, make sure. I also ordered a fuse holder for it because the fuse holder got damaged in shipping, and see if this thing will work. So I'm hoping the VFO and I are done admiring each other and I can just move on. So that's, but I'm happy. This thing is built like a tank. I mean, you figure a simple little Drake VFO is nothing at all like this thing. It's the same kind of theory, but this is built like a tank. It's just crazy. All right, that's about it. Again, this is a VFO, a couple tubes here. There's the test point on it. I haven't opened up this thing yet to see what little marbles are in there. Hopefully I don't have to open that thing up. Looks like there's something to adjust in there, probably for frequency or something, I don't know. But let's give you a look at the VFO here. There she is. There it is. So it's a marvel, a work of genius. All right, that's my situation. I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.